So I went ahead and hit that record button. Feel free to interact with the chat features, probably the easiest way to ask questions or get any sort of clarifications about this topic. I will make sure that chat feature is open. Um, so if that is where you want to throw some questions, probably the easiest way to interact with me, just so we don't have any delays or anything along that line. So welcome everybody. Real quick background on myself. My name is Sean Pitts. I am the education coordinator here at INHS Health Training. My main job here is EMS education, pre-hospital education, as well as some instructor development. As well as I'm a volunteer firefighter here in Spokane County and an advanced EMT. Got about 13 years of pre-hospital experience on the ambulance up north of Spokane, and the firefighting thing is fairly new in my career, so it's something I'm just branching out into. On the pre-hospital side, on the education side, I currently oversee a couple different programs here at INHS. We run an emergency medical technician program, an advanced emergency medical technician program. We also have a paramedic program here at INHS, as well as varying other programs that might interest you as a general member of the public, which I got a little bit of time here at the end that I want to kind of talk about those, just because I think they're all really, really good programs that a lot of people in the community could benefit from. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But a unique introduction or unique piece of me that I wanted to share, because it kind of goes along with the reason why I'm presenting this topic of Stop the Bleed, is a handful of years ago, I was involved in a pretty unique experience. I was invited to do a ride along here in the city of Spokane with Spokane Police Department with a good buddy of mine that is a police officer here in the city. While I was doing that ride along, an incident happened in the north side of Spokane where an individual entered the Wells Fargo bank right before 5 p.m. in an attempt to rob the teller. During that time, an individual from the public attempted to take the gun away from that individual and was shot in the armpit and the leg twice with a larger caliber handgun. Our police department responded. I happened to be involved with that response and did some basic first aid to render care to this individual with those 2 gunshot wounds. And inevitably, thankfully, kept this gentleman from losing his life in this event. So that's one of the things that we're going to kind of talk about and base this whole thing off of, is how can you, as a general member of the public, be empowered, be educated, and have some training on what can you do in some of these circumstances. Now, the program that I'm talking about, Stop the Bleed, is a program that we're going to start teaching here at INHS. I'll show you where to sign up for those courses. And the great part about the Stop the Bleed campaign is we are offering these classes free to the public. So these are going to be free trainings that will be available. I think we are teaching 4 of them this year. We did submit and get approved for a grant here in Washington State to provide this training to general members of the public. And so I will talk about sign up for those, as well as this is meant to be kind of a general overview of that program, what that program is about, as well as I didn't want this to be just kind of a quote unquote sales pitch and just talk about the program. We are going to talk about very, very scraping the surface, the tip of that iceberg of what some skills you can take away from this presentation that'll hopefully leave you wanting just a little bit more, and so you can come take that program from us. But we will we'll talk about that as we kind of get going. So the first disclaimer I have is a couple of things. Number one, any pictures that I show, they're all going to be fake injuries. There is no real blood and guts in this presentation. So if that's what you're looking for, I'm really, really sorry. If that's not what you're looking for, that's great news. I know this is during lunchtime, so some of you might have your lunches sitting right in front of you. So just be aware that none of the pictures, even though they might appear to be graphic, are not graphic in nature. I tries to use cartoons and pictures of fake injuries. I do have one picture in here that is moulage, which is trauma makeup. So it does look very, very real. I took the picture, I made the injury, so I can assure you that it is not real. It is meant to look real, so be aware of that, but we're going to use that to talk about a couple of things. But just my big disclaimer. The other one is I do not recommend any particular product. We're going to talk about some of those products that are available. I tried to grab a couple of different offerings for these and things like that. I do not get any financial compensation from any of these companies or any of these products. I will show you a personal kit that I have and talk about where you can find something similar to that. But I definitely don't have any specific, I'm not represented by anybody, anything along those lines. So that is my one big disclaimer kind of right out the gate for this one. So here's what we're kind of talking about today is this Stop the Bleed campaign. Now, I love this slogan, the Stop the Bleed, Save a Life. Now, what we are talking about is this this campaign that actually came when we were seeing an increase in some of these issues in the United States, where they were talking about active shooters and mass casualty incidences. I got a couple of quotes and article headlines from the Boston bombing, from the Las Vegas shooting, but it actually became this nationwide push to empower the bystanders in the United States to be more prepared for some of these unfortunate circumstances. The only downfall with that is it did become what a lot of people were calling the Stop the Bleed campaign was this active shooter course. And trust me when I tell you, this is not about gunshot wounds and stab wounds. This really is talking about general trauma to the human body. That could be from a chainsaw, that could be from a kitchen knife, this could be from an automobile accident, this could be a fall where a bone from your body breaks the skin and causes damage. This is not designed to be the active shooter or mass casualty course. So definitely something to keep in mind. These are recommendations. These are tools. This is education that can be used in a varying circumstances across the board. So this is not designed to be about gunshot wounds and stab wounds. So kind of keep that in mind. And it really is designed. A lot of people, think that this isn't something they can do, or these are procedures by trained medical professionals. This is very much designed to be performed by the bystander, right? This is before professional help arrives. Now, some of these pieces of equipment that we'll talk about will appear like it's something only trained medical professionals should be utilizing, and that's not true. These are devices that you can purchase, that you can utilize with the proper training. So just kind of keep that in mind as we move forward. That this is not for trained medical professionals. This is very much geared towards the public and the lay rescuers, just like all of you currently sitting in this program. So these are a couple of just the headlines kind of taken from this. This is the reason why this course was designed. Number one, during events like the Las Vegas shooting, tourniquets, which we'll talk more about that here in just a second, tourniquets absolutely were proven to save lives during the Las Vegas shooting. A lot of the tourniquets that were applied were even applied by bystanders, not trained medical professionals. The unfortunate thing with a lot of these incidents is, if we're talking just about those situations, is you as the public are going to be there before me as a trained medical professional is going to be. So what's important is, what can you do as a general member of the public to increase the survival for these individuals? That's specifically from Las Vegas. If you look at the situation that unfolded with the Boston bombing, I threw just some general information up here. There were 10 patients with 12 lower extremities experiencing major vascular injury. That means we're talking about severe bleeding. Of 66 injured patients, 29 patients had recognized extremity exsanguination. That means life-threatening bleeding at the scene. In total, 27 tourniquets were applied, 16 of 17 traumatic amputations. And you can continue to read that. Where I want to go is the very bottom. Among all 243 patients that had those extremity traumas and those injuries, mortality was 0%. Now, if you remember, there were 3 fatalities in this incident and the Las Vegas shooting, but all three of those fatalities were proven to be from the explosion of those devices specifically. So you can see here that trained members of the public are the reason why we're seeing mortality so low in some of these events. Now, at the Boston bombing specifically, there was a large military presence because of the nature of the race itself, as well as a large EMS presence. But I will tell you that general members of the public were able to perform life-saving techniques that we're going to talk about today. And of course, we dive much deeper in the Stop the Bleed course specifically. One a little bit more local besides my event with the bank robbery incident is down here where it says off-duty volunteer firefighter saves man whose leg was severed in crash. This was actually a family, or sorry, not a family, a friend of mine that had taken my EMT program. She actually used to work for INHS, was driving down a highway after a motor vehicle collision, and a gentleman had been struck by a vehicle. His leg had been severed, and she was able to improvise a tourniquet, which we will talk about here in a little bit, improvise a tourniquet to stop the bleeding in this gentleman and inevitably, most likely saved his life. Sadly, he did lose that limb because the limb was severed during the incident itself. But I think most of us will agree when you're weighing, a limb loss versus saving someone's life, we would much rather probably be on the saving the life side. Now, I will talk about limb loss and tourniquets and some of those common misconceptions here in a few minutes. Excuse me. But absolutely the use of a tourniquet in that situation, as well as Las Vegas, as well as the Boston bombing, were the difference between lives being lost. There was a study that was done that says up here in the right-hand corner, new research from Texas shows that for civilian patients with peripheral vascular injury, and that's going to be in our extremities, pre-hospital tourniquet use is associated with dramatically improved odds of survival. Now, that means tourniquets being applied before these patients get to the hospital. That's going to be the difference between this person living and this person dying. And again, this is not about gunshot wounds and stab wounds. All these studies are looking at vast differences in injury presentation. So just kind of keep that in mind. All right. So the other big thing to take away here is let's just talk about time for a second. It doesn't matter how quickly you call 911, even though that is important, but how quickly you call 911, because a lot of injuries, especially in the larger vessels in your lower legs, you do have some of those large vessels in your upper arms as well, in your arms as well. But a lot of those injuries can cause life-ending bleeding prior to the arrival of EMS, which is why we want to empower the general members of the public, because the difference between this is minutes, right? A person who is bleeding can die from blood loss within 5 minutes of these injuries, right? And I will tell you from experience, as well as a slide coming up, the average response time for fire department, for ambulance companies, even for law enforcement in some of these situations is probably closer to 7 or 10 minutes. So you're talking about injuries that can cause life-ending issues within 5 minutes, and trained medical help is not going to be there until about 7 minutes, which means we have to have a way of training the public how to deal with these injuries and how we can increase survivability prior to pre-hospital arrival, which is ambulance, fire department, law enforcement. All of those individuals have more advanced first aid knowledge than, of course, what you guys are being empowered with in this program. But it's definitely something that needs to be trained. It's no different. I want you to think of this like we're training lots and lots of people in the public for AED application, as well as, excuse me, CPR and hands-only CPR. This is for individuals who are not dead. This training is provided to individuals prior to the death of someone. So that's how important this is going to be. You see here, average time to bleed out from a critical vascular injury, those big blood vessels in your arms and legs, is about 3 to 5 minutes. Average time for first responders to arrive is 7 to 10 minutes. So we have to be giving the general members of the public some better tools. And I knew there was bad information out on the internet and things like that. As I was building this presentation and I was looking for statistics and for articles, I found websites that are citing really, really poor bleeding control methods and really, really poor use of tourniquets and things along those lines. And I was just blown away, and it made me even more understand why the public needs better organized training from nationwide driven science, nationwide physicians, statistics, evidence-based research, all of those things. And Stop the Bleed is 100% evidence-based medicine. This is not a small company that is putting this program out. This is a nationwide push backed by trauma physicians and large organizations and kind of those big names in trauma care, the Academy of Trauma Surgeons, like very, very good foundational people. And I'm going to bring some of that into this presentation, as well as talk about where you can find more information about this program. All right, so that's kind of the background of the program, as well as some information. I see there's already a question in the chat box. There isn't a certificate for this one available. It's not like you get a certificate for Stop the Bleed. That we expect some more hands-on, which of course we can't do in this web-based environment. So sadly, that's not something we can accomplish. But I will talk about again where you can find this free program at the end of the presentation, as well as talk about some of our other programs. So give me just a second here. I'm going to jump back and forth between a document here. So give me 1 second to, all right. So I got this flow chart, and this flow chart's put out by Stop the Bleed. Hope everyone can see this, where it says, save a life, what everyone should know to stop bleeding after injury. Chris Fisher, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that PDF I got up on the screen, just because I can see your camera? Awesome, great, thank you very much. So we're gonna work through this algorithm and give you guys some tools and talk about a couple of different things. Here's the first things first. All of these injuries, again, whether this is a chainsaw injury, a knife injury, automobile collision, a fall, any kind of injury that this could be, this could present itself in. The very first thing is right there where it says ensure your safety. You're not going to help anybody on that scene. You're not going to be able to help any of the first responders. You're not going to help anybody if you become part of this injury. So please, 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 there's a few things I want you to remember from this program. The first thing I want you to remember is we as trained medical professionals would never expect you to put your life in danger to save someone else. That includes family, friends, loved one, random strangers, so on and so forth. Your safety is absolutely paramount. So please, before you rush in, before you pull your vehicle over and try to help someone in an automobile crash or anything along those lines, please make sure your safety is 100% intact and you're not putting yourself in a situation that is going to directly impact your life, your family's life, and so on. So that's the first thing. The next thing, though, is we're going to look for life-threatening bleeding. Now, this does involve your eyes as well as it involves your hands, because some life-threatening bleeding very well could be hidden under these big bulky things we all wear, which are clothes. So you might have to lift someone's shirt up. Of course, be aware of modesty, gain permission, and those kinds of things. But be aware that it's very easy for injuries to hide under clothing, especially if that individual was wearing any sort of protective equipment. You think of a motorcyclist who wrecks his motorcycle, might be wearing leathers or a helmet or a protective, covering. Some of those injuries can be hidden underneath those clothes. So do your very best with gloved hands, right? Blood is icky and sticky and it's not yours. And so it can have all kinds of stuff that, you can get diseases, and we won't even go into that today because that could be a whole lunch and learn on its own. But be aware that you should be protecting yourself. Part of ensuring safety is wearing gloves. I will tell you that that's probably when we start talking about some of these in-home kits, or if you want to purchase items to be having in your homes or your vehicles or things like that, gloves would be a very, very good option. to keep yourself safe. So you're going to look for life-threatening bleeding. Now, with life-threatening bleeding, one of the things I want you to think about is, what does life-threatening bleeding, look like? Now, again, this is not a real injury for those that are joining a little bit late. On your screen is a makeup injury. This is not real, even though it looks real. I assure you, I know it's kind of graphic, but it's totally fake. It's wax and fake blood. I want you to look at the characteristics of this injury. First off, when I made this injury with some makeup, you can see that I kind of hit it under jeans and we kind of made a flap. But looking at this injury, there are a couple of characteristics when you're looking for life-threatening bleeding that I want you to think about. Some of those characteristics are here on the right-hand side. Location is a very important characteristic. What I'm talking about is, if you had a laceration very, very low on your arm, that's not a dangerous location. You don't have large vessels in your, or large veins and arteries in your fingers and your toes and your hand and your foot. Those are not dangerous locations. What we're talking about is, the higher up you go on those extremities, the larger the vessel is going to be that's feeding that area. So location would be important. Your neck has very, very large and vital vessels. Your chest cavity, your abdominal cavity, all of those kinds of things. Location is very, very important to note when it comes to severity of injury. So keep that in mind. The next one is the size of the wound. If it's a smaller laceration, obviously not going to be on the life-threatening bleeding side. A larger laceration, like you can see this one, I made to go clear across this individual's thigh. That's definitely a large size wound. Amount of blood comes into play as well. Now, most people, even trained medical professionals, most people will overestimate the amount of blood that is seen. So be aware of that. I don't want the amount of blood to be the number one thing that you're relying on, but it's definitely something to kind of be important. I will tell you that, in my opinion, and if you look at medicine, if you look at the way our bodies react to losing blood, that last one down there, the ability for the person that's injured to stay awake is very, very important. If the individual appears to be tired or sleepy, or they're altered, they're saying funny things, they're unable to articulate where they are or what happened, that right there is a dead giveaway that this individual is suffering from a dangerous, life-threatening bleed, which means this needs to be stopped and needs to be taken care of very, very quickly. So that's life-threatening bleeding. Now, this is not designed to be a complete list or anything along those lines, but these are definite things you want to think about. Location, size of that wound, amount of blood that you can see or maybe that you can't see. You can be thinking about the blood that travels down into these individuals' clothes, things like that. And then alertness of a person is a really good place to start. Now, as we continue down this little algorithm here, the next thing that comes down to is a trauma kit available? And I'm going to go where you can see where it says yes versus no. Now, most of you probably, if I had took a poll right now of the 40 people that are tuned in, I bet you some of you might have a small first aid kit, whether that was from Walmart, Walgreens, CVS, a pharmacy-driven first aid kit. Now, these are great, but I'll bet you if you open those up, it was a lot of Band-Aids and maybe a bee sting removal, maybe some aspirin, depending on the kit. What I'm talking about is a trauma-driven first aid kit, okay? Now, there are lots and lots of these that you can purchase. So for example, I'm grabbing mine here. I don't know if you can see this very good, but this is a trauma-driven first aid kit. Now, this one just happened to be purchased from a company called North American Rescue. You can see it's fairly large. I mean, this thing's probably 1.5 feet wide. You can see how deep it is. A kit like this is going to run you a couple $100, right? This has tourniquets. This has emergency blankets. This has gloves. This has all kinds of stuff. This is a little bit advanced. This is something that I would carry in a vehicle. I've heard of people putting these on their boat, on their 4x4s or their razors or side-by-sides, hunting kits and hunting camps, things like that. where trauma is definitely a little bit more prevalent. Or really, there are some other kits. Give me one second here. There are some other kits that are available. Something as more similar as this. This probably is going to run you. This kit also from North American Rescue is going to run you about $100, maybe a little bit less than that. You can see here. We're going to talk about some of these things. It has a tourniquet, has a pressure gauze. It's got some regular gauze. It's got 2 pairs of gloves. It's got a permanent marker, which is going to be utilized to write the time on that tourniquet. Got a pair of trauma scissors. These are designed to cut away clothes and expose some of those injuries. It even has some bleeding control instructions, which is great. And it's got a survival blanket. These are more like a very isolated injury, where the kit that I showed you that was mine is designed for probably dealing with a couple of patients that could be injured. The military would call this an IFAK, like an individual first aid kit. These are really, really good kits. You can research them. If you Google "Stop the Bleed" bleeding control kits, you can find varying agencies that put out varying products. I don't recommend any certain one particular product or manufacturer. That's going to be up to you guys to do a little bit of research. But one of these kits is very, very nice because it's got all your tools you're going to need there. Now, if you don't have those tools and you end up over here on this "Is trauma first aid kit available" on the no side, then what you're looking for is you're looking for some clean gauze. Now, or I'm sorry, clean cloth. Now, this could be their shirt, your, their pants, probably not your pants, their pants, a towel, a blanket, curtains, a car blanket, anything along those lines. And when it says clean, I'm not talking about sterile. I'm just talking about it's not covered in grease and dirt and grime and oil or anything along those lines. But what you're going to do is you're going to apply good, steady, direct pressure. Now, with that direct pressure, one of the very, very important things to keep in mind is direct pressure is something that needs to be on the wound itself, and it needs to be firm, continuous pressure. This is not push for a few seconds and then lift up that shirt and see if it worked, and then push for a few seconds. You're just going to cause that wound to bleed and bleed and bleed. Once you apply direct pressure, you should not really be releasing this pressure until trained medical help arrives. Now, if you're using a shirt, a large towel, drapes, whatever you were able to find, one of the things that you want to be aware is when you apply pressure, is it working? And one of the things the American Heart Association teaches is if the wound continues to bleed. Now, the problem with that is if you're using a shirt, or like take my sweatshirt, for example, if you were using this dark colored sweatshirt and you had taken this off and you had balled it up and stuck it on this individual's leg, you would never know if blood soaked through this sweatshirt. It's too dark in color, it's too bulky. So what you're going to have to look for is the patient or is that person getting worse? Were they alert when you started and now they're getting sleepy? Is the color of their skin starting to look ashen or gray or pale? Is their blood seeping underneath the injury? All of those things would be examples that this is not working. And I will tell you that if direct pressure doesn't work, if applying that good, firm, continuous pressure doesn't work, then there's a next step. And that's the next step we're going to talk about. And a little side note, direct pressure should be forceful. Okay. This is not a two finger. This is not like this is good, firm, direct pressure. In fact, one of the statistics or one of the parameters is if you take your femoral artery, for example, the large artery found between about your hip and your knee, right in the middle, it's on the inside of your thigh. That sucker is about the size of your thumb. And if that would to be lacerated, it takes 110 pounds of pressure to actually stop that bleed. Now, I don't know about you, but 110 pounds worth of pressure from a normal adult is probably going to take two hands locked together, and you will be pushing down pretty substantially on that wound. So we're talking about a lot of force. The same thing goes for an injury on that brachial artery. Your brachial artery runs between your shoulder and your elbow. On the inside, it separates your bicep and your tricep. That one's about the size of your pinky finger. That also is gonna require a lot of force. The incident that I had with the bank robbery I talked about in the opening part of this slide, the individual's wound was inside his armpit, and that was actually a lot harder to control than the one on his lower leg. His lower leg was very, very easy to control. His armpit, because it was in kind of a junction, we had a really, really hard time applying some good firm direct pressure, and we ended up balling up some clothes and applying that direct pressure because of where that injury was located. So direct pressure is something you want to be aggressive, and you almost want to be forceful. If this person's yelling and screaming and begging for you to stop and things like that, I understand it's not nice. It's not easy to listen to someone complain or voice their concern with their pain. But it sounds really mean to say, but no one ever died from pain, okay? They will die from blood loss. So make sure that you are aggressive with this bleeding control. All right. The next piece of this algorithm is if you do have a first aid kit, right? First aid kit available, the answer is yes. The answer is no, check pressure and call for help. We're gonna get there here in a second. Where the wound is also vitally important. If it's in an arm or a leg, your question becomes, do you have a tourniquet available, which we're going to talk about next. If it's at the neck, the shoulder, or the groin, and you can see where those are pointing, you're going to pack the wound with bleeding control gauze preferred, or any gauze or clean cloth. Now, if you have bleeding control gauze, I'm trying to pull some out here. If you have bleeding control gauze that are available inside those kits, give me a second here to find some bleeding control gauze, something like this, where you can open it up. It's a gauze that's like Z folded. That works really good. Or if you've got cloths, you're going to stick it inside there as much as you possibly can and apply good controlled pressure. Again, this is for injuries that are on the neck, the shoulder, and the groin. I absolutely can't stress enough, you cannot place a tourniquet around someone's neck and crank that tourniquet down. It's not going to help a neck wound, okay? You also cannot get those tourniquets above injuries that are in the shoulders and the groins. That's why good aggressive direct pressure is going to be the treatment that is designed for neck, shoulder, and groin. Now, if it's in the arm or leg side of things, is a tourniquet available? If the answer is yes, let's talk about that first. You're going to apply the tourniquet above the bleeding site, and you are going to tighten the tourniquet until the bleeding stops. I'm going to say that again. This is vastly important. Do not miss this one. Apply the tourniquet above the injury and tighten the tourniquet until the bleeding stops. Okay? We're going to talk about tourniquets here in just one second. If the injury is at the arm or a leg, you do not have a tourniquet, you're going to take gauze, you're going to take that shirt, you're going to take that towel, you're going to pack the wound to the best of your ability and apply steady direct pressure until help arrives. Okay? Now, on the tourniquet side of things, let's talk about that for a second. There are plenty of aftermarket tourniquets that you can reach out and purchase. One of the most common ones that you'll probably find is what's called a combat application tourniquet, or they're nicknamed CAT, C-A-T. That is what you see across, it's in the upper left-hand corner here, it's in the right-hand corner here. The one here you see where it says SOF, S-O-F, tourniquet. A lot of people call those soft T tourniquets. There's also an approved tourniquet. There's one called the SWAT, S-W-A-T. That's what I've pictured down here in orange or on the right-hand side. SWAT in this case stands for stretch, wrap, and tuck. Different types of tourniquets. All of these are available tourniquets. They're recommended tourniquets. You can do all kinds of research. There's all kinds of stuff. There's arguments for certain tourniquets. Please do be careful. There are, if you're not spending about $20 on an aftermarket tourniquet, you might be ending up with something that is not nearly as manufactured strong and like not good manufacturally sound. That's why I will tell you this is not a sales pitch. Like I said, I do not get any financial compensation from any organization. But if you order the tourniquets from North American Rescue, you will always be getting quality tourniquets. I think they run between $20 and $30 for a tourniquet. What we're talking about is a combat application tourniquet. They come vacuum sealed in a package just like this. That's one of those CAT tourniquets. That organization will only sell recommended tourniquets. That's why I always talk about them. You can get in a lot of trouble on Amazon and Google, and one here you can see on wish.com. It was kind of a joke where it's $4.31 for a tourniquet. I probably wouldn't trust my family's life with a $4.31 tourniquet. So just kind of keep that in mind. Now, these are aftermarket tourniquets, right? These are designed for tourniquet application. Now, things that are not tourniquets, and the reason why I bring this up is you hear a lot about improvised tourniquets, right? Things that people grab, they're the MacGyver style, they're makeshift tourniquets because you're in the backwoods or you're in your vehicle, where the case might be. Things that are not good tourniquets. Hair ties, key rings, rubber bands. I found this picture. I thought it'd be quite comical. I don't know what you would use as a tourniquet with the plastic thing that's left on a water bottle. I mean, you kind of get the point here. These are all really, really poor representation of tourniquets. The reason is they're too thin. They cause damage to the skin without actually constricting. If you go back to this, look at how wide of all of these tourniquets actually are. And then if you look here, these are all very narrow. Other things that we've heard of or seen, belts, even though this one's wide, people think these are wide. Belts are actually a really, really poor tourniquet unless you buy, they actually make belts that can be doubled as tourniquets. These leather belts that you're buying for most like dress, suits and ties and jeans and things like that, you can't get a really good twisting motion to actually make these tourniquet. So they don't do a very good job. Shoelaces make terrible, terrible tourniquets. So stay away from shoelaces. Extension cords, terrible, terrible tourniquets. Again, see how narrow these are? You need something about 1.5 inches to 2 inches wide. That's why we recommend these aftermarket tourniquets that you purchase, you put in your vehicle. I've heard of people putting in these like their everyday carry, suitcases or laptop cases in your vehicle, on your 4x4, your side-by-side, your motorcycle, or whatever your purses, things like that. They don't take up very much space. They weigh absolutely nothing. And these are the difference between life and death in some of these critical bleeds. Now, not that this is recommended, but I know some of you, because maybe you don't have a tourniquet and this incident happens tomorrow. So what is a good makeshift tourniquet? I will tell you, taking strips of fabric 2 inches wide and tying them in a knot, and then finding something like a wrench or a strong stick or something along those lines, sliding that in there and spinning that is probably one of the best makeshift tourniquets there are. Now, please don't hear me say I recommend makeshift tourniquets, because absolutely, improvised tourniquets are poor substitutions for commercial tourniquets. Improvised and makeshift tourniquets should be converted into a commercial tourniquet as soon as absolutely possible. So I'm not telling you to makeshift tourniquets. In fact, I'm strongly recommending that if this is something you're passionate about, you go buy an aftermarket tourniquet that can be utilized in those situations, not a makeshift tourniquet. Those makeshift tourniquets are just something that is going to be, they're just not nearly as good as other tourniquets, okay? Now, once the kind of end of this whole algorithm here, right? Once we've applied that tourniquet, this is a time for 911 to be called. And we want you to take a Sharpie, a pen, anything you can write with. The military teaches mud or blood. you can write the time that tourniquet was applied to the patient's forehead. You can write it on their arm. You can write it on the tourniquet. A lot of those aftermarket tourniquets, I don't know if you really can see this here, aftermarket tourniquet have a light colored strap that you can write directly on it. Some of these first aid kits, like you saw that one bleeding control kit had a Sharpie. Those things, the time needs to be documented so we know how long this tourniquet's been on. Now, I know what you've probably heard about tourniquets because I also heard those, especially some of us that have been taking some basic first aid classes, maybe in the 90s, the early 2000s. Here's the deal. Tourniquets do not cause amputations. 100% hands down, total myth, okay? The damage that is needed to cause an amputation doesn't even start until about 2 hours into that tourniquet being applied. Most of the time that we're talking about civilians having tourniquets placed on them, they're only going to have those tourniquets on for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, or maybe even an hour. When they get to the hospital will then be in charge of controlling those injuries and removing those tourniquets. Please, as general members of the public, you never ever remove a tourniquet and you never ever loosen a tourniquet once it's applied. So please keep that in mind. But you can see here, this is the diagram we've been using for the last couple of years to tell people the danger of amputation due to tourniquets is far longer than most of us are ever going to be encountering these individuals, okay? And tourniquets are not the problem. These are 8 pitfalls of bleeding taken from one of the doctors that oversees the Stop the Bleed campaign, and I want to talk about these. One of the very first problems we're seeing in the public is not using a tourniquet or waiting too long to apply that tourniquet. The reason why people wait too long or not use them is because of the really, really poor information that's given out to the public about tourniquet use. Tourniquets do not cause amputations. Tourniquets save lives. It's been proven time and time again, whether it's Boston, whether it's Las Vegas, whether it's general members of the public. These are absolutely times that tourniquets need to be utilized. Not making a tourniquet tight enough to obliterate the distal pulse. Now, you guys won't be checking distal pulses, but what you will be doing is you want to tighten these tourniquets down until bleeding stops completely. If you're a little bit more first aid training and you want to check for distal pulses, that's fine. What we're talking about is if the tourniquet is applied at just below the elbow, then you would be looking for a pulse below. And what you want is you don't want any blood flow below that tourniquet. Let's skip not using a second tourniquet because that's going to be something for trained medical professionals. Here's another one. Do not periodically loosen a tourniquet. Early on in the first aid world of education, we were talking about this. This is no longer a recommendation. That's like turning the water on and turning the water off and turning the water on and turning the water off to stop a flood. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Please do not loosen a tourniquet once a tourniquet has been applied. Using an improvised tourniquet is also a pitfall. We strongly recommend manufactured tourniquets. They work far better and the success rate is far higher than improvised tourniquets. Packing a wound with hemostatic gauze product, like one of these gauze I was talking about, and then thinking you are done. Sometimes you'll pack that wound and the wound continues to bleed. It's time to apply a tourniquet, okay? If direct pressure doesn't work, tourniquet is your next option. This is one of my big pet peeves, letting the victim's discomfort and pain interfere with what you need to do. I know it sucks. I've listened to lots and lots of people beg me to stop doing something because it hurt them. Individuals don't know that the pain that might be caused could inevitably save their life. So do not, when you're tightening those tourniquets, they might tell you, stop, that's tight enough. You're going to tighten that tourniquet down until that bleeding has stopped completely, okay? No matter what that patient is begging you to do. Last thing, doing nothing when a tourniquet or wound packing supplies are not available. We talked about improvised tourniquets. We talked about using blankets and towels and clothes as in place of wound packing supplies. So please, just because you don't have an aftermarket first aid kit or something along those lines doesn't mean you do nothing. Those just make your life a lot easier when it comes to treating these injuries. Okay. The bottom line of this whole thing is no one should die from an uncontrolled hemorrhage. Okay. No one should die of an uncontrolled hemorrhage. A lot of these injuries we're finding were treatable if general members of the public would step in and utilize some of these skills that we're talking about. Okay. Truly, my hope, and not just my hope, that sounds very self-centered. Our hope as Stop the Bleed across the country is you see lots and lots of these defibrillators, these public access AEDs. We see a lot of drive for CPR courses in our area. What I want to see, our hope is we see bleeding control kits available to the public. These can be purchased for agencies and companies, and you put them on the wall as you open them up. We're hearing about these in schools. We're hearing about these in large offices. All of those things are available. They're just as prevalent as automatic external defibrillators. And the education is just as important to be looking at bleeding control as we emphasize with CPR and first aid. Okay. Now, I know this was like quick. It was down and dirty. I know it was a lot of information. This really is just kind of the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Stop the Bleed. One of the questions I'm sure that pops in your head is, what more are you going to talk about when it comes to this information, the Stop the Bleed course? The biggest thing that we're going to be added is giving you hands-on application of these tourniquets. We have mannequins that we can actually pack stuff into. We can apply tourniquets, getting your hands on some of these situations, asking interactive questions about situations you may have been in or maybe you haven't been in. All of those things are going to be what can be covered in that course. I want to real quick just put my information up here before I show you our website and talk about some of our courses. If you want to reach out and communicate with me in any way, my email is there. Our website to all of our courses is down there. It's courseregistration.inhs.org. The phone number that's up there, that's our general office line. You are more than welcome to that information. I do want to real quick show you this, our website here. Give me 1 second to just pull this up. Here we go. So this is our website. This is that courseregistration.inhs.org. If you go up here to course listings, when you click on this, a search box does pop up for search courses, and you can just type in Stop the Bleed, and our courses will pop up there. My internet's giving me some issues there, so sorry about that. But you type in Stop the Bleed and sign up for those courses. We are going to have 4 of those this year. There we go. We are going to have 4 of those this year. Right now, March is our first offering. That's March 26th. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's a 2-hour course, lots of hands-on, lots of interaction with instructors. This absolutely will be a great course. I can assure you that. And it's at the right price, which is $0 to you as the public. So take a look at that. We also at INHS offer CPR courses, basic first aid courses, where we can talk about some of the other injuries and illnesses that you might encounter. I'm going to throw my information back up there, this last final slide, just in case as you're logging off, you have any questions for me. The chat box is open. You can unmute your mic and let me know if you have any questions. And then that, guys, that's all I have for you. I greatly appreciate you guys letting me join you for your lunch hour. I hope this was informational. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know if you have any questions. If not, you guys all be safe, stay healthy, and I will hopefully see you guys all soon. Have a good day, guys.